Hmm. Uh-oh. Well, hello, folks. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. My topic for tonight is currents in the evolving political stream. And I'm a little late in arriving tonight and a little discombobulated as well. So you'll give me a minute before I start. I'm going to get things in order here. Okay, hi, Kay. I have things more or less, Kay, in order now, but there's still a little bit of a problem. I intended to start talking about uh, maybe I can do this. Okay, hang on 1 second. One of my links, okay, was broken for this, and I have to see if I can get it. Okay, another way. Uh, it was a link from Sputnik to an article by Scott Ritter, okay, on Gaza. And my link to Scott's specific article, okay, was broken. And that was the first article that I was going to comment on, okay, and analyze. So I am here on Sputnik now. Trying to find that post. but I'm having trouble finding it. Okay, let me just basically outline it then. Okay, so Scott Ritter is convinced let me just try one more thing here. Ah, I got it. Good. Okay, let me share the article then. Hi, Steve. Thank you for coming. That was a good discussion over on D's tonight, wasn't it? So this is an article from a few days ago from Sputnik, okay, Global, from November 23rd by Scott Ritter. The headline is Hamas is winning the battle for Gaza. There, of course, is a picture of a tank and a picture of Scott. He talks about the ceasefire being a blessing for Palestinians, okay, and Israelis alike, uh, and for emotions to cool down and so on. But of course, it is not a ceasefire. It's not been a ceasefire. Okay, it's a so-called, okay, it's a pause, and it's not a pause where there is no more fighting. For example, Palestinians cannot go back to their homes in the north of Gaza. If they try, as they have been, they were fired upon and some were killed. So, anyway, Scott says one of the reasons Israel eschewed a ceasefire was that it was confident that the offensive operation it had launched into northern Gaza was going to neutralize Hamas as a military threat. And any ceasefire, regardless of the humanitarian justification, would only buy time for a defeated Hamas to rest, refit, and regroup. That Israel signed on to a ceasefire is the sure sign yet that all is not well with the Israeli offensive against Hamas. And I think Scott, okay, is right about that. Was that all there was to the article? I don't think so. But and maybe that's all Scott wanted to say. It could be that's all there was to that particular column. Uh, but I had the impression Scott was saying much more. I might have just been screwed up in including this article. But let me point out that Scott was convinced that the tunnel network and the difficulty of rooting Hamas out of the tunnel network, that the Israeli attempts, to root them out were not going well, and that it was becoming apparent that the Israelis were not going to be able to do that. Since November 23rd, Scott has maintained that position. Okay, the videos, I've seen. And he's convinced the situation is one where Hamas is emerging from the tunnels each night and is being very successful, in attacking the Israeli Defense Forces and destroying vehicles, and men, as well, and that Israel can do very little about it. So the Israelis may be preparing to bomb the hell out of Gaza again once the pause, is over, but they haven't been able to stop the attacks on themselves in the northern part, of Gaza. And I think that Scott, is of the opinion that they may have to withdraw from there. Now, this is partly going to depend, of course, on what Hezbollah decides to do. In the north, they now have most of their troops concentrated in Gaza, only about 70 or 75,000, up north. That's not going to be enough, if Hezbollah decides to invade. They're going to have to shift many, many troops to the north, and they'll have a very difficult time handling Hezbollah there anyway, because Hezbollah will use rocket, and missile warfare very, very successfully against the Israeli Defense Forces. Of course, the United States will at that point come in and provide material support for the Israelis. Probably the aircraft carriers are going to get involved there at that point, but still, it's going to be a grave threat, to Israel. So this situation, from the military standpoint, does not look very good, for Israel. We're waiting this Friday. They're supposed to be on the talk by by the leader of Hezbollah, specifically Nasrallah. And he has taken a very measured approach to this war while inflicting considerable damage on the Israeli Defense Forces, in the north, and continuing to do so, from afar, without engaging very much. And it's obvious they don't want, a wider war, but it's also obvious they're prepared for one. If they're forced into it, they've already indicated what would force them into it is any increasing success of the Israeli forces in getting rid of the Hamas threat, on the ground. So the more successful the Israelis are on that, the more likely it is that Hezbollah is going to come in the north. So maybe fortunately for the Israelis, they're not having very much success in rooting Hamas out. Their success has been in killing, a lot of the Palestinians and uprooting them from their homes. That's what the success has been, if you can call it that. But that has involved the commission, of war crimes and the mobilization of the whole international community, against them, certainly in the Arab, and Muslim world, and in the Western world also. There was a report today that now Israel is facing sanctions from the EU. The European Union has actually voted for sanctions against the Israelis, which was something I was not expecting. But the demonstrations in Europe were so significant that the EU had to do something. and they're now making moves to constrain Israel. I personally think that's a very good sign. I think Israel needs to back off from what it's been doing, in Gaza. These are horrible war crimes and collective punishment, human rights violations. They're every kind of violation you can possibly think of, being committed by Israel, at this point. But I agree with Scott. Hamas is winning the ground war there. Israel is not being successful, in rooting them out. It's what we all expected, and it's happening. It's very definitely happening. So I'm going to go away from that now, and I'm going to move to the second of our pieces for tonight. Let me just do something on Facebook first over here. And bring in some more perspectives, on Gaza. The next piece we're going to look at is from Counterpunch. It was done on November 21st, 2023, and it's about Israel's nuclear threat. The dangers only multiply. I guess I'm not yet sharing it, so let me get it in here. Okay, so this one was written by Joshua Frank. I'm going to increase the size of the type. Get the ad out of the way. Israel's robust military, the fourth strongest in the world, is ravaging Gaza, and along with armed settlers, terrorizing Palestinians in the West Bank following the brutal Hamas massacres of October 7th. I don't know, I agree with the characterization of the massacres. I think that they were military targets that were attacked. There's evidence has emerged that lots of the killings on October 7th were actually by the Israelis and not by Hamas. So whether there were many massacres, I think, is a disputed fact. But like so many other colonial projects, Israel was born of terror and has necessitated the use of violence to occupy Arab territory and segregate Palestinians ever since. The realization that its existence was dependent on a superior military in an unfriendly region also encouraged Israel to pursue a nuclear weapons program shortly after the state's founding in 1948. Even though Israel was a young nation by the mid-50s with the aid of France, that's the 1950s, of course, it had secretly begun the construction of a large nuclear reactor that two allies had teamed up to launch a nuclear weapons program without the knowledge of the administration of President Dwight D. Eisenhower turned out to be a colossal and embarrassing American intelligence failure. Hello, CIA. Not until June 1960, the final year of Eisenhower's presidency, did U.S. officials catch wind of what was already known as the Dimona Project. Daniel Kim-hee, an Israeli oil magnate, having undoubtedly had one too many cocktails at a late-night party at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, confessed to American diplomats that Israel was indeed constructing a large, quote, power reactor, unquote, in the Negev desert. a startling, a revelation. Quote, this project has been described to Kim Hee as a gas-cooled power reactor capable of producing approximately 60 megawatts of electric power, unquote, read an embassy dispatch addressed to the State Department in August of 1960. Quote, Kim Hee said he thought work had been underway for about 2 years and that a completion date was still about 2 years off. Okay, the Dimona reactor wasn't, however, being built to deal with the country's growing energy needs. As the U.S. would later discover, it was designed with input from the French to produce plutonium for a budding Israeli nuclear weapons program. In December 1960, as American officials grew more worried about the very idea of Israel's nuclear aspirations, French Foreign Minister Maurice Couve de Merville admitted to U.S. Secretary of State Christian Herter that France had, in fact, helped Israel get the project off the ground and would also provide the raw materials, such as uranium, the reactor needed. As a result, it would get a share of any plutonium Dimona produced. Israeli and French officials assured Eisenhower that Dimona was being built solely for peaceful purposes. Trying to deflect attention, Israeli officials put several cover stories to back up that claim, asserting Dimona would become everything from a textile plant to a meteorological installation, almost anything but a nuclear reactor capable of producing weapons-grade plutonium. And there were atomic denials. In December of 1960, folks, we're talking 63 years ago, after being tipped off by a British nuclear scientist concerned Israel was constructing a dirty, that is, extremely radioactive newt, reporter Chapman Pincher wrote in London's Daily Express, quote, British and American intelligence authorities believe that Israelis are well on the way to building their first experimental nuclear bomb, unquote. Israeli officials issued a terse dispatch from their London embassy, quote, Israel is not building an atom bomb and has no intention of doing so, unquote. Obviously, in retrospect, a lie. With Arab countries increasingly worried Washington was aiding Israel's nuclear endeavors, Chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, John McCone, leaked a classified CIA document to John Finney of the New York Times, claiming that the U.S. had evidence Israel, with the help of France, was building a nuclear reactor, proof that Washington was none too pleased with that country's nuclear aspirations. President Eisenhower was stunned. Not only had his administration been left in the dark, but his officials feared a future nuclear-armed Israel would only further destabilize an already topsy-turvy region. Quote, reports from Arab countries confirmed the gravity with which many view this possibility for nuclear weapons in Israel, read a State Department telegram sent to its embassy in January of 1961. So there's more of this. I'm going to skip over it because, of course, it's about the history. Going into John F. Kennedy in May 1961, things were changing. JFK even dispatched 2 Atomic Energy Commission scientists to inspect the Dimona site. Though he came to believe much of the Israeli hype, the experts pointed out that the plant's reactor could potentially produce plutonium, quote, suitable for weapons, unquote. The CIA, less assured by Israel's claims, wrote in a now declassified national intelligence estimate that the reactor's construction indicated, quote, Israel may have decided to undertake a nuclear weapons program At a minimum, we believe it has decided to develop its nuclear facilities in such a way as to put it into a position to develop nuclear weapons promptly should it decide, to do so. And of course, that's precisely what happened. In January 1967, NBC News confirmed that Israel was on the verge of a nuclear capability. By then, American officials knew it was close to developing a nuke and that Dimona was producing bomb-worthy plutonium. Now, this was before the 1967 war, remember, before the great victory of Israel in 1967 and the somewhat lesser victory in 1973. By then, American officials knew it was close to developing a nuke and that Dimona was producing bomb-worthy plutonium. Decades later, in a 2013 report citing U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency figures, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists revealed that Israel possessed a minimum of 80 atomic weapons and was the only nuclear power in the Middle East. This was as of 2013. Pakistan wouldn't acquire nukes until 1976 and is in any case normally considered part of South Asia rather than the Middle East. To this day, Israel has never openly admitted possessing that kind of weapon and yet has consistently refused to allow inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, to visit the secretive site. Nevertheless, evidence suggests that a major project at Dimona was underway in 2021 and that Israel was by then actively expanding its nuclear production facilities. So, in other words, this is 2023. There's been no acknowledgement by Israel of the nuclear capability, but if it had 80 nuclear warheads in 2013, it's very likely it has a lot more than 80 now. And by the way, in 2017, the article says it was revealed that on the verge of the Six-Day War in June of 1967, it was revealed that the Israelis had even contemplated exploding a nuclear bomb in Egypt's Sinai Desert as the ultimate threat to its neighbors. At that time, as human rights attorney Noura Arakat explained to Daniel Denevere, on the Dig, President Lyndon Johnson's administration came to see in Israel, quote, a significant Cold War asset and pivoted very quickly and established this new policy of ensuring Israel's qualitative military edge in the region, whereby it can defeat singularly or collectively any Middle Eastern powers, unquote. And that, she added, was done in those Cold War years, quote, to ensure its sphere of influence across the Middle East in competition with the Soviet Union. So that was the change in American policy to significantly favor Israel over the rest of the Middle Eastern nations. The Eisenhower administration and the Kennedy administration in the early days tried to maintain at least some neutrality with respect to those conflicts, but then there was a pivot by the Johnson administration. As Israel and the U.S. remain the closest of allies, the thinking in Washington went, it could act as Washington's military proxy in the Middle East. Proxy wars go back a long way, folks. From 1966 through 1970, average aid per year increased to about $102 million, and military loans increased to about 47% of the total. The Congressional Research Service reported in 2014 Israel became the largest recipient of U.S. foreign assistance in 1974. From 1971 to the present, U.S. aid to Israel has averaged over $2.6 billion per year, two-thirds of which has been military assistance, unquote. Despite Washington's wish for a symbiotic and mutually beneficial relationship, Israel wasn't afraid to go rogue when its leaders believed it would serve their interests. In June 1981, for instance, Israel bombed the Osirik nuclear reactor, then under construction in Iraq with the assistance of France, and Italy. Top officials in the administration of President Ronald Reagan weren't pleased that the strike had been carried out with American F-16s, and Israel was legally required to utilize the fighter jets only in cases of legitimate self-defense, quote unquote. After some backroom wrangling, however, they decided to chalk the matter up as a diplomatic dispute, having come to believe that erasing Iraq's nuclear program and maintaining Israel's sole nuclear arsenal in the region justified the airstrike. I'm going to skip some more of the history, which is interesting and very significant, but I don't have the time to cover it all here. I want to get to the contemporary state. Many are concerned that Israel's cruel war in Gaza, if it were to expand regionally to include Hezbollah in Lebanon, would drag Iran, a prominent Hezbollah supporter, into the fray. That in turn might be all the justification Netanyahu would need to strike Iran's supposed nuclear sites. In fact, in response to drone and rocket attacks on American personnel in Iraq and Syria, by Iranian-backed people who are militants, the U.S. recently destroyed a weapons facility in Syria. As for the situation in Gaza, right-wing heritage minister, whose name is Amihai Eliyahu, a member of Netanyahu's coalition government, recently commented that, quote, one way, unquote, to eliminate Hamas would be the nuclear option. Quote, there's no such thing as innocence in Gaza, he added. In response to those comments, Netanyahu suspended Eliyahu, a largely meaningless act in an attempt to quiet criticisms at home and abroad that the war was harshly impacting innocent civilians, or perhaps it had more to do with Eliyahu inadvertently admitting to Israel's nuclear capability. No doubt, fearing a broader war in the Middle East, the Biden administration is committing itself heavily to Israel's efforts to eliminate Hamas, not only by delivering interceptors for its Iron Dome missile defense system and upwards of 1,800 Boeing-made JDAMs, those are guidance kits for missiles, but also by replenishing stocks of weapons for Israel's American-made F-35 fighter jets and CH-53 helicopters, as well as KC-046 aerial refueling tankers. In addition, 2 U.S. aircraft carrier task forces have been deployed, to the Middle East. I understood that there were 3. I thought there were 2 in the Mediterranean and 1, in the Red Sea, but I may be mistaken about that, as has an Ohio-class nuclear submarine. To top it off, according to a New York Times investigation, the U.S. is providing commandos and drones to help locate Israeli and American hostages in Gaza. Of course, any military escalation, especially one that leaves Israel fighting on multiple fronts, would only increase the chances that things could get much worse. A cornered, nuclear-armed Benjamin Netanyahu would be the definition of a perilous situation in a war where not journalists, schools, or even hospitals, is proven off limits Indeed, well over 25,000 tons of bombs have already been dropped on Gaza by early November, the equivalent of two Hiroshima style nukes without the radiation. Under such circumstances, a nuclear capable Israel that blatantly flouts international law could prove a clear and present danger not only to defenseless Palestinians, but to a world already in ever more danger, in disarray. This piece first appeared at Tom Dispatch. Joshua Frank is the managing editor, of Counterpunch. I think, largely speaking, this is a very excellent piece in going into the historical background. I think the implication of it, though, with respect to number of warheads the Israelis are likely to have, I've heard estimates ranging between 80 and 400, nuclear warheads. If they have 400, it would be the equivalent of the number of nuclear warheads the Chinese have. So it would really be getting up there. But I suspect it's probably closer to 200. I certainly don't think the 80 applies any longer. There must have been a terrific acceleration of the production of nuclear weapons when the Netanyahu administration came into office. The facilities had already been built, by Israel, and I'm quite sure those warheads and the missiles, to deliver them, are in the hundreds in terms of their number. But I'd put it 200 as opposed to 400. So that's the nuclear weapon perspective on this conflict. So there is, D is there. Hi, D. I did leave the StreamYard link, I'm sure, earlier today. Anyway, let me present the next piece. This one was from Common Dreams. It's a pretty short piece. Top EU officials slam settlement expansion funds, in the Israeli budget. This was as of November 27th, which was yesterday. This is not self-defense and will not make Israel safer, wrote Joseph Borrell, the European Union's foreign affairs chief, who is generally recognized, as an idiot by many commentators, on international affairs. But when I read this piece at first, I thought it signaled a change, in EU attitudes. And today it was followed up by the announcement that the EU is going to sanction Israel. That was announced, earlier today. A very, very significant move that may have been motivated by what the EU chief said he was appalled to learn, quote unquote, that Israel's wartime government is preparing to vote on a budget plan that includes money for illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank, where settler violence against Palestinians has grown in recent weeks amid Israel's assault on Gaza. In the middle of a war, the Israeli government is poised to commit new funds to build more illegal settlements. This is, quote, this is not self-defense that will make Israel safer. The settlements are a grave humanitarian law breach, and they are Israel's greatest security liability. So Borrell was referring to settlement funding, including in an end-of-year budget proposal Israel's war cabinet is expected to approve on Monday. Monday, of course, was yesterday. Under the proposed budget, funding would be allocated to West Bank settlement constructionists as well as to arming civilian guard squads, according to a summary highlighted, by Ite Epstein of the Norwegian Refugee Council. This allows for the purchase of off-road vehicles, body armor, camera-equipped UAVs, and other electronic surveillance equipment, and the employment of reconnaissance personnel. This is a militia of Israel's settlers mandated to construct humanitarian aid to Palestinians made vulnerable by the establishment and expansion of these very settlements. So, obviously, the settlers are going to be further armed to drive the Palestinians out of the West Bank. This is what this is about. Israel's Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, a far-right supporter of settlement expansion, defended the budget proposal and denied that any of the money would go toward constructing new settlements. He's a liar. There is funding for security needs in the West Bank, Smotrich told the Times of Israel, describing Palestinians in the territory as Nazis. I think we know who the real Nazis are. The budget proposal, well, they're in Ukraine, but I think in Israel we know who the real Nazis are. The budget proposals sparked backlash from inside the Israeli government, with Knesset member and former opposition leader Benny Gantz demanding the removal of all political payouts, including settlement funding. He's talking about, of course, payouts from Netanyahu to Smotrich and to Ben-Gvir. And he said, billions of dollars are due to be set aside for ultra-Orthodox and far-right-wing pro-settler parties. The Middle East Eye reported Monday that leaked details of the budget revealed an increase in funding for yeshivas by $133 million, as well as allocating $107 million to the National Missions Ministry, which is run by Smotrich's far-right party. So there's a budget fight, that's been going on there, but the news of the budget fight and what that budget is for seems to have triggered action by the EU, which was taken here today. That means that the Europeans are now ready to act to constrain Israel, and hopefully they're also ready to act to try to constrain them from the genocide that is going on. I wanted to show you and also discuss two pieces by Pepe Escobar. One he wrote on November 15th. It's at thecradle.co. And I'm going to share it for you. These two are very, very insightful articles as to what is going on from the geopolitical point of view. Pepe Escobar is from the point of view of journalism, one of the leading journalists, on geopolitics. He's not an academic, but he has a tremendous amount, of on-the-spot knowledge about what's going on in various nations, across the world, about things like the Belt and Road Initiative, about what's happening in Central Asia, about what's happening in Russia, about what's happening especially with the integration of Eurasia. otherwise known as the world island, and the maxim of geopolitics: who controls the world island controls the world. This is November 15th, 2023, from Pepe Escobar. And there's a photo. This is a photo, I guess, of all the nations well, I can't really say what's a photo of. Obviously, there are representatives of a lot of nations of the global south, okay, who are represented here. And of course, the Chinese are here too, and the Russians are here too, okay, and very prominent, okay, as well. Right in the center is the actual ruler, de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. And you see the Prime Minister, okay, of Iran here. And there are various other representatives that I need to be closer up, okay, in order to pick out. But we're looking at a big representation. The global south was expecting the dawn of a new Arabian reality. After all, the Arab street, even while repressed in their home nations, has pulsed with protests expressing ferocious rage against Israel's wholesale massacre of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Arab leaders were forced to take some sort of action beyond suspending a few ambassadorships with Israel, calling for a special Organization of Islamic Cooperation (OIC) summit to discuss the ongoing Israeli war against Palestinian children. That was probably a photo of the OIC summit. Representatives of 57 Muslim states convened in Riyadh on the 11th of November, okay, to deliver a serious practical blow against genocidal practitioners, okay, and also the enablers. But in the end, nothing was offered, not even solace. And I'm going to increase the size of the top type on this so you can see it better. I think I'm successfully sharing it. Am I not? Yes, I am. So, the OIC's final statement will always be enshrined in the gilded palace of cowardice, says Pepe Escobar. Highlights of the tawdry rhetorical show: we oppose Israel's self-defense, quote unquote. We condemn the attack on Gaza. We ask who, question mark, not to sell weapons to Israel. We request the kangaroo ICC to, quote, investigate, unquote, war crimes. We request, okay, a UN resolution condemning Israel. For the record, that's the best 57 of the Muslim countries could drum up in response to this 21st century genocide. History, even if written by victors, tends to be unforgiving towards cowards. The top 4 cowards in this instance are Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Emirates, that is, also Bahrain and Morocco, the latter three having normalized relations with Israel under a U.S. heavy hand in 2020. These are the ones that consistently blocked serious measures from being adopted at the OIC summit, such as the Algerian draft proposal for an oil ban on Israel, plus banning the use of Arab airspace to deliver weapons to the occupation state. Egypt and Jordan, longtime Arab vassals, were also non-committal, as well as Sudan, which is in the middle of a civil war. But Turkey, under Sultan Recep Tayyip Erdogan, once again showed it is all talk and no action. Okay, a neo-Ottoman parody of the Texan, quote, all hat, no cattle, unquote. The next section is called BRICS, okay, or IMEC. So you'll learn what IMEC is here. The top four cowards deserve some scrutiny. Bahrain is a lowly vassal hosting a key branch of the U.S. empire, okay, of bases. Yes. Okay, and U.S. empire of bases. Okay, also one country, Morocco. It has close relations with Tel Aviv. It sold out quickly after an Israeli promise to recognize the claims, okay, of the capital Rabat on Western Sahara. Moreover, they heavily depend on tourism, mainly from the collective West. So that's the top four cowards. Okay. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Those are the two of the top four cowards. The other two, then we have the big dogs, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Both are stacked to the rafters with American weaponry, and like Bahrain, also host the military bases from the U.S. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, otherwise known as MBS, and his old mentor, the Emirati ruler, specifically Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ, do factor in the threat, okay, of color revolutions tearing through their regal domains if they deviate too much from the accepted imperial script. But in a few weeks, starting on January 1st, 2024, under a Russian presidency, both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, which of course is the capital, okay, of the Emirates, will expand their horizons big time by officially becoming the members of the BRICS 11, because of course it looks like there's going to be, actually it doesn't look like, okay, there's going to be 11 BRICS. The BRICS were trying to add 6 more nations. They started out with 5. They started out with 4, expanded it to a 5th. Okay. But we're trying to add 6 more. They invited 6 other states. One of them was Argentina. But whether Argentina would join was dependent on the elections just completed inside, okay, of Argentina. The winner of those elections was a neoliberal libertarian, okay, by the name of Javier Milei. And he is going to turn in the Argentinian currency for the dollar, make the dollar the currency, okay, of Argentina, vastly constraining the fiscal space of that particular country and guaranteeing austerity, okay, in Argentina. And he has also said that he's not joining the BRICS. So I guess it's going to be the BRICS 10. Saudi Arabia, okay, and UAE were only admitted into the expanded BRICS because of careful geopolitical and geoeconomic calculations by the Russian China Strategic Partnership. Those countries, along, okay, with Iran, which happens to have its own strategic partnership with both Russia and China, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, are supposed to reinforce the energy cloud of the BRICS sphere and be key players. Further on down the road in the de-dollarization drive, whose ultimate aim is to bypass the petrodollar. Yet at the same time, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi also stand to benefit immensely from the not-so-secret 1963 plan to build the Ben Gurion Canal from the Gulf of Aqaba to the eastern Mediterranean, okay, and arriving, what a coincidence, very close to now devastated northern Gaza. The canal would allow Israel to become a key energy transit hub, dislodging Egypt's Suez Canal. That happens to dovetail nicely with Israel's role as a de facto key node in the latest chapter of the War of Economic Corridors. The U.S. concocted India Mid-East Corridor. That's where the initials for IMEC come from. It stands for the India Mid-East Corridor. IMEC is a quite perverse sort of acronym, as is the whole logic behind the fantastical corridor, which is to position international law breaking Israel as a critical trade hub and even energy provider between a part of the Arab world, uh, 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 between India, part of the Arab world, okay, and Europe. That was also the logic between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's UN charade in September, where he flashed the quote, whole international community, unquote, a map of the quote, new Middle East, unquote, in which Palestine had been totally erased. All of the above assumes that IMEC and the Ben Gurion Canal will be built, which, says Pepe Escobar, is not a given by any realistic standards. Back to the vote at the OIC, U.S. minions, Egypt and Jordan, two countries on Israel's western and eastern borders, respectively, were in the toughest position of them all. The occupation state wished to push approximately 4.5 million Palestinians into their borders for good. But Cairo and Amman, also awash in U.S. weapons and financially bankrupt as they come, would never survive U.S. sanctions if they lean too unacceptably towards Palestine. So, in the end, too many Muslim states choosing choosing humiliation over righteousness. We're thinking in a very narrow, pragmatic national interest terms. Geopolitics, okay, is pitiless. It is all about natural resources and markets. If you don't have one, you need the other. And if you have none, a hegemon dictates what you're allowed to have. The Arab and Muslim street and the global majority may rightfully feel dejected when they see how these, quote, leaders, unquote, are not ready to turn the Islamic world into a real power pole within emerging multipolarity. It wouldn't happen any other way. Many key Arab states are not sovereign entities. They're all boxed in, victims of a vassal mentality. They're not ready yet for their close up facing history, and sadly, they still remain hostage to their own, quote, century of humiliation, unquote. The humiliating coup de grace was dispatched by none other than the Tel Aviv genocidal maniac himself. He threatened everyone in the Arab world if they don't shut up, which they already did. Of course, there are very important Arab and Muslim bravehearts in Iran, Syria, Palestine, Iraq, in Lebanon, and Yemen. While not a majority by any means, these resistance actors reflect the sentiment on the street like no other. And with Israel's war expanding each day, their regional and global clout is set to increase immeasurably, just as in all the hegemons' uh, uh, other regional wars. Of course, when he refers to the hegemon, he's always referring to the United States, strangling a new century in the cradle. The catastrophic debacle of Project Ukraine and the revival of an intractable West Asian war are deeply intertwined. Beyond the fog of Washington's worry, quote unquote, about Tel Aviv's genocidal rampage, the crucial fact is that we are right in the thick of a war against BRICS 11. As I said, it now has to be BRICS 10. The empire does not do strategy. At best, it does tactical business plans on the fly. There are two immediate tactics in play: the U.S. Armada deployed in the eastern part of the Mediterranean in a failed effort to intimidate resistance axis behemoths, uh, 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 Iran and Hezbollah, and a possible Malay election in Argentina tied to his avowed promise to break Brazil-Argentina relations. And Malay, of course, as I already stated, was elected, in Argentina. So he's promised to break the ties to Brazil of Argentina. That's part of his abandoning the invitation to join BRICS. So, says Pepe Escobar, this is a simultaneous attack on BRICS 11 on two fronts: West Asia and South America. There will be no American effort spared to prevent the BRICS 11 from getting close to OPEC Plus. The key aim is to instill fear in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, as confirmed by Persian Gulf business sources. Even vassal leaders at the OIC would have been aware that we are now deep into the Empire Strikes Back. That also largely explains their cowardice. They know that for the hegemon, multipolarity equals chaos, quote unquote. Unipolarity equals, quote, of the order, unquote. And malign actors equal the autocrats, quote unquote, such as the new Russia Chinese Iranian axis of evil, quote unquote, and anyone, especially vassals, that opposes the, quote, rules based international order, unquote. That brings us to a tale of two ceasefires. Tens of millions across the global majority are asking why the hegemon is desperate for a ceasefire in Ukraine while flatly refusing a ceasefire in Palestine. And of course, we have to add that may be changing now. There's pressure on the administration here, uh, seems to be wearing on the administration, and they may be turning to try to pursue a ceasefire, but that's apart from this article. Freezing Project Ukraine, which was written on the 15th, of course, and we are now on the 28th of November. Freezing Project Ukraine preserves the ghost of hegemony just a little bit longer. Let's assume Moscow would take the bait. It won't. But to freeze Ukraine and Europe, the hegemon will need an Israeli win in Gaza, perhaps at any and all costs to maintain even a vestige of its former glory. But can Israel achieve victory any more than Ukraine can? Tel Aviv may have already lost the war on the 7th of October, as it can never regain its facade, of invincibility. And if this transforms into a regional war that Israel should lose, the U.S. will lose its Arab vassals overnight, who today have a Chinese and Russian option waiting in the wings. The roar of the street is getting louder, demanding that the Biden administration, now seen as complicit with Tel Aviv, halt the Israeli genocide that may lead to a world war. But Washington will not comply. Wars in Europe and West Asia may be its last chance. It will lose to subvert the emergence of a prosperous, connected, peaceful Eurasia century. Well, I think this piece is so broad, okay, in its scope, and so evocative in terms of the imagery, and brilliant in terms of the analysis that it brings, that I wanted to bring this to you at night. I think it accurately describes the significance of the broader conflict that is going on now in terms of the geopolitics of it. It places the Gaza war in perspective, the broader perspective, okay, of geopolitics for control of the future, for the development of multipolarity, okay, in the world, and for the integration of Europe, okay, and Asia, which the strategic partnership of Russia and China, okay, and uh, their integration in the BRICS, okay, is all about. This is all about whether the Belt and Road Initiative of China can be accomplished successfully and can bring the integration of Europe and Asia, which it is looking for. So, going on to the final piece for tonight. It's another one by Pepe Escobar. This one is called Gaza, a pause before the storm. I don't think I successfully shared it, but there it is. Gaza, a pause before the storm. Also from the Cradle, but this is from November 23rd, more recent. The U.S. and its allies will continue backing Israel's war on Gaza after a brief truce, which of course we're in right now. It's the pause, so-called. But as the case for genocide, quote unquote, grows stronger, the new multipolar powers will have to confront the old hegemons and their rules-based chaos, says Pepe Escobar. And here is a photo of the devastation, of Gaza and the military causes of it. And there's a Palestinian flag right in the middle of it. And the photo credit is to the cradle. While the world cries, quote, Israeli genocide, quote, and also Genocide Joe, I might add, the Biden White House is gushing over the upcoming Gaza truce it helped broker, as though it's actually, quote, on the verge, unquote, of its biggest diplomatic victory, unquote. Behind the self-congratulatory narratives, the U.S. administration is not remotely, quote, wary about Netanyahu's endgame, unquote. It fully endorses it, genocide included, as agreed at the White House less than 3 weeks before Al-Aqsa flood, in a 20th of September meeting between Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu and Joe, quote, the mummy, Biden's handlers. The mummy. Joe the mummy. In a way, that's even better than Genocide Joe. The U.S. Qatar brokered truce, quote unquote, which is supposed to go into effect this week, is not a ceasefire. It is a PR move to soften Israel's genocide and boost specifically Israeli morale by securing the release of a few dozen captives. Moreover, the record shows that Israel never respects ceasefires. Predictably, what really worries the U.S. administration is the unintended consequence of the truce, which will, quote, allow journalists broader access to Gaza and the opportunity to further illuminate the devastation there, and turn public opinion on Israel. Real journalists have been working on Gaza 24/7 since October 7th, dozens of whom have been killed by the Israeli military machine in what reporters Sans Frontiers calls, quote, one of the deadliest tolls in a century. These journalists have spared no effort to go all the way to quote, illuminate the devastation, unquote, a euphemism for the ongoing genocide, shown in all its gruesome detail for the entire world to see. Even the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, the UNRWA, itself relentlessly attacked by Israel, revealed somewhat meekly that this has been, quote, largest displacement since 1948, unquote, an exodus, quote unquote, of the Palestinian population, with the younger generation, quote, forced to live through traumas of ancestors or parents, unquote. As for public opinion, all across the global south slash the global majority, it, quote unquote, turned long ago on Zionist extremism. But now the global minority, populations of the collective West, are watching raptly, horrified, and bitter that in just 6 weeks, social media has exposed them to what mainstream media hid for decades. There will be no turning back now that this penny has dropped. By the way, I think this is a tremendous insight. Once you see the horror as revealed by social media, you cannot unsee it, and the mainstream media can no longer hide it. The horror has been there, is there for all to see. A former apartheid state leads the way. The South African government has paved the path globally for the proper reaction to an unfolding genocide. parliament voted to shutter the Israeli embassy, expel the Israeli ambassador, and cut diplomatic ties with Tel Aviv. South Africans do know a thing or two about apartheid. They, like other critics of Israel, better be extra wary moving forward. Anything can be expected. An outbreak of foreign intel conducted terror, quote unquote, false flags, artificially induced weather calamities, fake, quote, human rights abuse, unquote, charges, the collapse of the national currency, the rand, instances of lawfare, assorted Atlanticist apoplexy, sabotage of energy infrastructure, and more. Pepe Escobar really makes all this come alive, doesn't he? Several nations should have by now invoked the Genocide Convention, given that Israeli politicians and officials have been bragging on the record about razing Gaza and besieging, starving, killing, mass transferring its Palestinian population. No geopolitical actor has dared thus far. South Africa, for its part, had the courage to go where few Muslim and Arab states have ventured. As matters stand, when it comes to much of the Arab world, particularly the U.S. client states, they are still in rhetorical swamp territory. The Qatar brokered truce came at precisely the right time for Washington. Okay, I thought it was an Emirati broker truce, but okay. I'm sure Pepe knows better than I about this. It stole the spotlight from the delegation of Islamic/Arab foreign ministers touring selected capitals to promote their plan for a complete Gaza ceasefire in Gaza, plus but also negotiations for an independent Palestinian state. The Gaza Contact Group, uniting Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Palestine, made their first stop in Beijing, meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, then on to Moscow, meeting with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. That was definitely an instance of BRICS 11, again, I'm afraid it's BRICS 10, already in action, even before they started business on January 1st, 2024, under the Russian presidency. The meeting with Lavrov was held simultaneously with an extraordinary online BRICS session on Palestine called by the current South African presidency. Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, whose country leads the region's axis of resistance and refuses any relations with Israel, supported the South African initiatives and called for BRICS member states to use every political and economic tool available to pressure Tel Aviv. In fact, it's really quite interesting that sanctions on Tel Aviv have come from the EU before coming from the Arab states. It was also important to hear from Chinese President Xi Jinping himself that, quote, there can be no security in the Middle East without a just solution to the question of Palestine, unquote. Xi stressed once again the need for, quote, a two-state solution, unquote, the, quote, restoration of the legitimate national rights of Palestine, unquote, and, quote, the establishment of an independent state of Palestine, unquote. This should all start via an international conference. None of this is enough at this stage. Not this temporary truce, not the promise of a future negotiation. The U.S. administration itself struggling with an unexpected global backlash, at best arm wrestle Tel Aviv to enact a short, quote, pause, unquote, in the genocide. This means the carnage continues after a few days. Had this truce been an actual ceasefire in which all hostilities came to a halt and Israel's war machine disengaged from the Gaza Strip entirely, the next day options would still be pretty dismal. Realpolitik practitioner John uh, 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 practitioner Mearsheimer already cut to the chase. A negotiated solution for Israel Palestine is impossible. I hope, okay, it is not impossible because tomorrow night, okay, uh, uh, um, um, on Dee's program, we'll be covering the Green Party. Okay, I guess it's called a seminar. I think that's actually the wrong word for it, but okay, it will be like a seminar, and we'll be discussing the possibilities for the rise of a just peace, okay, in Palestine. And a just peace will have to involve a negotiated solution, okay, for Israel Palestine. That is the only path. So Pepe is saying here that he doesn't think a just peace for Israel Palestine is possible given the present situation, because he seems to agree, okay, with Mearsheimer's analysis. It takes a cursory glance at the current map to graphically demonstrate how the two-state solution, advocated by everyone from China, Russia, to much of the Arab world, okay, is dead. A collection of isolated Bantustans can never coalesce as a state. And while that is true, okay, I believe that if the settlement involves no longer isolating them from each other because of the removal of Israeli forces from the areas where the isolation is going on, then they would be able to coalesce, okay, as a state. Of course, under the present map, they cannot coalesce as a state, but a just peace and a real two-state type of solution would involve changing the map and would involve, I think, also getting rid of the settlers. So the Bantustan would be ended by such a negotiation. Let's grab all their gas. There has been thundering noise all across the spectrum with the advent of the Petro One getting closer and closer. The Americans badly need Eastern Mediterranean energy bought and sold in U.S. dollars, including the vast gas reserves off the Gaza coastline. And to the U.S. administration's energy security advisor deployed to Israel to, quote, discuss potential economic revitalization plans for Gaza centered around undeveloped offshore natural gas fields, quote. What a lovely euphemism, says Pepe. While Gaza's gas is indeed a crucial vector, Gaza, the territory, is a nuisance. What really matters for Tel Aviv is to confiscate all Palestinian gas reserves and allot them to future preferential clients, the EU. But in spite of this, the EU is currently sanctioning Israel. Keep that in mind. The EU itself may not be going along with this. Enter the India-Middle East corridor, again, the IMEC. Actually, the EU, Israel, Saudi Arabia the Emirates India corridor, conceived by Washington as the perfect vehicle for Israel to become an energy crossroads power. It fancifully imagines a U.S. Israel energy partnership trading in U.S. dollars, simultaneously replacing Russian energy to the EU and halting the possible export increase of Iran's energy to Europe. We return to the 21st century's main chessboard here, the hegemon versus BRICS. Beijing has had steady relations with Tel Aviv so far, with lavish investment in Israeli high-tech industries and infrastructure. But Israel's pounding of Gaza may change that picture. No real sovereign can hedge when it comes to real genocide. In parallel, whatever the hegemon may come up with in its various hybrid and hot war scenarios against the BRICS, China, and its multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, that will not alter Beijing's rationale and strategically formulated trajectory. This analysis by Eric Lee is all one needs to know about what lies ahead. Beijing has mapped out all relevant tech roads to follow in successive 5-year plans, all the way to 2035. Under this framework, BRI should be considered a sort of geoeconomics UN without the G7. If you're outside of BRI, and that concerns, to a large extent, old comprador systems, and elites, you're self-isolating from the global south slash the global majority. So what remains of this, quote, pause, unquote, in Gaza? By next week, the Western-backed cowards will restart their genocide against women and children. And they will not stop for a good long while. The Palestinian resistance and the 800,000 Palestinian civilians still living in northern Gaza, now surrounded on all sides by Israeli troops and armored vehicles, are proving that they are willing and able to bear the burden of fighting the Israeli oppressor, not only for Palestine, but for everyone, everywhere with a conscience. Despite such a terrible price to be paid in blood, there will eventually be a reward: the slow but sure evisceration of the imperial construct in West Asia. No mainstream media narrative, no PR move to soften the genocide, no containment of, quote, public opinion turning on Israel, unquote, can ever cover the serial war crimes perpetrated by Israel and its allies in Gaza. Perhaps this is just what the doctor, specifically metaphysical and otherwise, ordered for mankind: an imperative global tragedy to be witnessed by all that will also transform, us all. And isn't that one also a magnificent piece with dimensions that are very broad and with a perspective that, is very broad, world spanning in scope, showing the pathways to the future, the pathways, to alternative futures, as well. And we can judge, for ourselves. Is it likely that the IMEC path will be chosen, that will become a reality, given how difficult it will be to cut that canal from the port, of Eilat to the Mediterranean Sea in northern Gaza, or just north, of Gaza? By all accounts, that's going to take like 5 years. During those 5 years, the Belt and Road Initiative is going to be advancing. Of course, much depends on what happens in this war, but as I discussed in the early part of this stream, Israel is not winning, in Gaza. It might be bombing the hell, out of the population. It might be having some success in forcing them to leave, though there is much resistance. But it is not defeating Hamas. And if it does not defeat Hamas, it cannot win. And as it gets closer to defeating Hamas, which it is not doing right now, that brings Hezbollah into the war, which is 100,000 plus rockets and missiles to destroy the whole of northern Israel, severely damage Haifa, and Tel Aviv. And I'm not even talking about the Iranian assistance and the Syrian resistance that might be rendered to Hezbollah. Hezbollah doesn't want to fight a war. But if it's forced to, in terms of the imperatives it recognizes, it is going to do just that. And the Israelis have no answer except for the nuclear answer. And we know now that there can be a nuclear counter because Turkey has been talking to Pakistan about getting warheads to counter the Israelis with. To me, the probability of the alternative path, the IMAC path, actually coming to fruition is a much lower probability than the Eurasian integration that Russia and China, are looking for. Because not only has the collective West lost, the Ukraine war, and there will be no freeze. Russia's not going to take up a freeze. It's going to conquer further parts, of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army is collapsing right now. Right now, it's in a state, of collapse. The likelihood, is going to be that a rout is going to develop very soon, in Ukraine. And then the Ukrainian government, is going to collapse. Washington is looking for that $60 billion in extra aid to them now in Congress to try to save the matter. But I'm not sure they're going to get the $60 billion. I think before the fight over the $60 billion is done, it may be the case that the Ukrainian army will have already collapsed, with the loss in Ukraine, a fait accompli. To retain the hopes, of the hegemon, it will be necessary for Israel to win the war, in Gaza. And that doesn't mean just bombing the hell out of Gaza. It means uprooting Hamas. And given Scott Ritter's analysis, and the analysis of other military people too, specifically Douglas McGregor, the Russian military analysts, it doesn't look like Israel can uproot Hamas, which means it will lose that war. If Hamas continues to be there, then the canal building cannot proceed. It will be under attack from Hamas continuously, and they won't be able to stop that. There is no way to build the IMEC, okay, in my opinion, because Israel will have to accept a peace that allows for, okay, a Palestinian state. And no way will Palestine or the negotiators for Palestine turn over the oil revenue uh, to the hegemon so that they can be trading, okay, in dollars for the oil and gas that may be coming out, okay, of Palestine. So that's what I think of this whole situation. There's likely to be a big loss for Israel and for the United States, okay, in the Gaza war, in spite of the awful destruction being wreaked on Gaza, okay, and the population there. In the end, the Gazan population will win. Palestine will have, okay, an independent state, either through a one-state solution or through a two-state solution. And that is going to end the role of the hegemon in Western Asia. And it will clear the way for the success of the Belt and Road Initiative and for the integration of Europe, okay, and Asia. So that's what I have to say for tonight. I'm sorry this took so long, but I think it was worth it. I hope that you do too. I will entertain your comments right now. And Dee says her stomach is feeling queasy. I'm sorry, Dee. Dee says, Evelina's in the audience of my show tonight watching from Facebook. I let her know that you've been asking about her. Thank you, Dee. And, it was Kay who was asking about her. Evelina says that Javier Milei says a lot of things. What he can actually do is another thing. Regarding the BRICS, even Bolsonaro worked well, okay, with the BRICS, never left it. Probably the same will happen with Argentina. Already he's walked back his claim to drop Brazil as a partner. I didn't know that. Thank you, Evelina, for letting me know that. Which, along with China, he originally would have nothing to do with. And she says Javier Milei is a talking head. Most of his cabinet is made up, okay, of Macri appointees. But if they go ahead with his promise, okay, to dollarize, okay, that pretty much cuts him out, okay, of BRICS. BRICS is not going to accept that. And Kay says, if she wants to come back, I could live with her. And Evelina says she agrees the China-Russia initiative is more probable and indeed, okay, is more desirable. Yes, it certainly is. It's time for the United States to accept, okay, a multipolar world and a collaborative foreign policy. It's time for the United States to stop its sowing of chaos, okay, across the world. The history of things is when the United States doesn't get its way in a particular area, it creates chaos in that area. The world can no longer live with that. It has to stop. That also means that neither Trump nor Biden can be the president of the United States. if either one of them is we face a future of continuous conflict as they try to undo the Belt, okay, and Road Initiative and the integration of Europe, okay, and Asia, and continue to try to hold the position of hegemon in the world. Andy Candy says, D, try baking soda for gut issues. That stuff is amazing. Hi, all, just listening. Phenomenal articles, Joe. I'm high on the visions painted by them and grieving for the murdered. And Kay says she agrees, Joe. And so there we are. And I guess that's it for tonight. I am going to end the stream. Okay, on that note, I'll be back tomorrow with the Dump the Corruption show. Okay, the seminar that will go through Dee's, well, I guess it's not really going through Dee's show, it's going through a Zoom link. So let me give you the Zoom link here. It basically, the Zoom link. Okay, here's the Zoom link for what will be essentially a seminar, okay, discussing the prospects for just peace, okay, in Gaza. So it will focus on a particular part of what I was talking about, okay, tonight. And there'll be some very good people there, specifically Madeline and Dee. Okay, Madeline will be the moderator. There will also be Miko Peled, okay, is coming to it. And he is tremendously knowledgeable about the prospects for a solution in Israel, okay, in Gaza. He is just so outstanding. And okay, there are some other very good people. Okay, but anyway, I encourage you to attend that, okay, at 8 o'clock. I'm going to leave the link here so you can attend at 8 o'clock. I don't know how long it's going to go on for, but I'm going to tell you about the program that I have for tomorrow night, okay, as well. So there's the Zoom link. You need to pre-register, okay, for this one. Okay, so there that is. And I also want to tell you about the program that I'm going to have tomorrow night. It will be a Dump the Corruption program. What we're going to be talking about is how voting for president is not or should not be a personal expression, okay, of anyone. We'll also be talking about how a new Supreme Court case could possibly destroy the effectiveness of the United States government even more than it has been effectively destroyed. We'll also be discussing Biden's challengers on foreign policy. And in talking about them, of course, we're also following up on what I just was talking about, that both Biden and Trump are unacceptable in relation to stewards of our foreign policy. They have to be other people. So the Truthdig article we'll be discussing is about Biden's challengers, primary challengers, okay, on foreign policy. And then finally, I'm going to be discussing an old blog of mine. It's from okay from November 25th, 2010. Okay, I believe. Title of it is "The Maladaptive Giant," and it refers to the United States, and it's still very relevant, okay, to today, especially when we go through the analysis in the context of the dump the corruption plan, which I talk about so often on the dump the corruption shows. So I hope you'll be there for that. That will be a very, very important stream, I think. So that's what I'll be talking about tomorrow night. And with that, I'm going to leave you for tonight. I see there are still 4 of you here, so that's good. And I'll see you tomorrow night, okay, at 9 o'clock, which means, of course, that I may not be able to stay for the whole discussion uh, from the seminar because, oh, I shouldn't say a seminar. The proper word for it is webinar. That's what I was looking for before. It's going to be, okay, a webinar. So I may not be able to stay for the whole, okay, of the webinar. I hope I'll get a chance to say, okay, a few things. So I'm going to end the stream now. Thank you for coming.